Okay, and this part will continue with what we were talking about, my recommendation to you to learn some of the British history, and I recommended watching what's available on PBS, BBC videos on British history, British Empire. Those are really accessible. And there's another series called Monarchy, and whatever else that will be available to you. I'm sure they'll be making some really good videos pretty soon, even better than these. And then universities like Yale, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other universities will offer courses online that you can watch for free. Again, BBC. And Teaching Company has many courses that will be very helpful to you. One of the good things about it is that they have the transcript of the professor's lecture. So for us, for you that will be learning English as a second language or practicing it, those transcripts will come in handy, extremely helpful. Because I really think you have to have a general knowledge of British history to understand American history on a good level. So in that paragraph, he talked about vassals, fiefdoms, barons. These were the subdivisions, for example, in the feudal countries in Europe and Britain. And what he's trying to relate here, what he's trying to tell the readers, is that our states are just like those little kingdoms or those little fiefdoms, not kingdoms, fiefdoms in Europe. If they work together, if you're lucky they work together, there will be some sort of balance. But a lot of times, as we have seen throughout the course of history, they have not worked together. Sometimes a strong king appears and controls all of them. They are maybe in a state of peace, maybe they're peaceful, but they're living under a tyrant. And if a tyrant is not there to control what is going on, then all these vassals, all these feudal princes will fight with one another, and it's constant anarchy and constant warfare between these places. And nobody can tend to their business, nobody can tend to their life to make themselves more prosperous, more safe. Because as we have looked in the past Federalists, one of the problems that happened after the Revolutionary War, after the peace treaty was signed, a lot of these soldiers that were farmers that had gone to fight the British came back. They hadn't worked on their farms, and they had lost a lot of money. And because of that, there was a lot of problems. So even with a small war, the situation in the newly independent states was very bad. We talked about the Shays' Rebellion. That was one of the reasons that forced these founders to get together in convention, federal convention, and write this constitution, because they knew things will lead to chaos. And that was only because these farmers had gone to fight in a war for just a short time, relatively speaking. But he gives you the example of countries in Europe that for the longest time they were fiefdoms, and when the man that was in charge wasn't strong enough, these fiefdoms would break apart and make new countries. And it's constant chaos. So the paragraph says, when the sovereign happened to be a man of vigorous and warlike temper and of superior abilities, he would acquire a personal weight and influence, which answered for the time the purpose of a more regular authority. In other words, when the person who was over all these vassals was powerful, was charismatic, then he would manage to keep them in peace and would control them. But in general, the power of barons triumphed over that of prince, and in many instances his dominion was entirely thrown off, and the great fiefs were erected into independent principalities or states. In those instances in which the monarchy finally prevailed over his vassals, his success was chiefly owing to the tyranny of those vassals over their dependents. He says most of the time, when that strong man, when that monarch, when that king won over the vassals, and had control of the vassals, is because those vassals, those little barons and lords, were so treated their people so badly that the people no longer had any loyalty to them. And in that case, they went and sided with the king. Almost like what he said here at the beginning of this paper. He said, for the most part, people are going to be loyal to the state governments. The only time they won't be is if state government mistreats its people or does not do a good job making their lives secure and safe. So it says the same thing. In Europe, if the vassals, if these feudal princes and barons were mean to their people, then people would go side with the person who was stronger. Let's say a king would trust him more than they would to their vassals. He's constantly reminding the readers that something like this might happen in the United States if we don't unite. Because there are these people in different states that are ambitious. They want to say we're important, and they will constantly create problems between their state and other states, and that will lead to war and anarchy, and then the European powers, European monarchs would love to see that because they will find us weak then and they can dominate us. In trade, they will get better deals because we're weak. So it's constantly, directly or indirectly saying, union is the best thing for you. Then I'll continue reading. In those, well, I read that, the barons or nobles equally, the enemies of the sovereign and the oppressors of the common people were dreaded and detested by both. And these barons were hated by both the people that lived in their fiefdoms and the king that was over the whole land. Till mutual danger and mutual interest effected an union between them fatal to the power of the aristocracy. Had the nobles, by a conduct of clemency and justice, preserved the fidelity and devotion of their retainers and followers, the contest between them and the prince must almost always have ended in their favor and in the abridgment or subversion of the royal authority. He's saying the same thing he said at the beginning of this paper. He said if the barons were nicer to their people, treated them fairly, treated them justly, treated them with respect under the law, things were not chaotic, people would trust them and people would stay with their barons and their loyalty with them. But they did not, and people decided to side with the royal king. And at the beginning of this paper, if you remember, he said, if the states treat their citizens well, then the citizens will not ever be closer to the federal government than they are to the state government. And all the lies that these people are writing in the papers to say that we want to do away with the state governments, we want to get rid of the state governments, will be obvious to you. You will know that this will not happen. It will only happen if the state governments are not doing their job right. And this applies to us too. In the future, when we decide to unite, when humanity decides to unite, we will of course have some loyalty to our states, to our countries. That is natural. But we need a federal government to make sure that we don't go to war against one another and constantly have to keep spending money on military warfare. And at the same time, be loyal both to our countries and be loyal to the Union, because at the end of the day, our home is this planet Earth. And that's what's worth keeping healthy and safe for ourselves, and especially for the generations to come.